which I think is in some ways also important, is that she chairs the Interior and Environment Subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee. So, and being senator from Alaska, which she has been since 2002, I think natural resources are probably always on her mind. And we're very lucky to have her by video conference to make a few short comments. And hopefully that will lead into further discussion later on today about what role public policy and the government should play in dealing with these issues. So, off we go.
Hi, I'm Lisa Murkowski, Senator of the great state of Alaska and the Chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senate business is keeping me away from you now, but I am grateful for the opportunity to update you on congressional efforts to improve our nation's mineral security. Know that I'm also grateful for your attention to this issue. Minerals shape our daily lives, our standard of living, and really our ability to prosper. But very few seem to grasp that, or the fact that we rely on minerals for everything from the smallest computer chips to the tallest skyscrapers, and then of course everything in between. When it comes to protecting our mineral security, we've got our work cut out for us. Like many of you, I read the U.S. Geological Survey's mineral commodities summaries, and I read this every year that it's released. And each year, I have to tell you that I am dismayed to see our foreign mineral dependence continue to deepen. We now import at least 50% of 47 different mineral commodities, including 100% of 19 of them. And that presents a whole range of strategic and economic vulnerabilities. Rare earth elements have received the greatest attention, and rightly so. We're now 100% dependent on foreign supply to meet our needs for these technology metals. And when a state like Alaska has at least 70 identified deposits of rare earths, but none of them are being produced, you know that there's room for improvement in our mineral policies. My assessment is that we are in a new era, and we need to overhaul our laws to meet the challenges that it presents. And that's why I have introduced legislation to resolve problems up and down the mineral supply chain. My bill has not yet become law, but we're closer than ever to making that happen. We've reported our minerals legislation from committee. We've passed it through the full Senate. We've watched as the House of Representatives passed its own version, and then we have reconciled many of our differences in a bicameral conference. Our legislation has advanced because it includes a wide range of needed reforms. We establish a criticality index that will allow us to identify what is important and vulnerable to disruption. We require resource assessments to determine where our minerals are located. We implement serious permitting reforms to improve the notoriously slow federal process. We also promote workforce development, research into alternatives, recycling, and international cooperation with allies like Japan. These reforms are important and will finally begin to ease our foreign mineral dependence. But this is just the beginning of what is needed to ensure a strong, stable supply of the minerals that we need to build and compete in the 21st century. So good luck to all of you as you roll up your sleeves and work together over the next couple of days to develop strategies and identify solutions to help ensure our mineral needs are met. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you. I look forward to hearing more about your ideas and your discussions. Thank you.
Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker for today, Admiral Dennis Blair. And my name is Takeo Hoshi, by the way. I'm director of the Japan program at the Shorenstein Asia-Pacific Research Center at Stanford. And it's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker. You have already heard Admiral Blair speak as a sponsor of this conference. He's a chairman and CEO of Sasakawa USA. But now he is speaking as a former policy maker and a current researcher on this issue. And Admiral Blair has long experience in Asia issues, especially related to Japan, so I'm happy to say. And he's also on the boards of numerous organizations, including Freedom House, the National Bureau of Asian Research, the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and the Atlantic Council. Admiral Blair had distinguished career in U.S. Navy for 34 years. He served on guided missile destroyers in both the Atlantic and Pacific. And as many of you know, he served as Commander-in-Chief to the U.S. Pacific Command prior to retiring from the Navy in 2002. And I'm just reading from his biography. And I don't know what retirement means here, because after the retirement, he continues to be active. Admiral Blair was the president and CEO of the Institute for Defense Analysis from 2003 to 2006, served on the boards of many public and private corporations. He was the director of national intelligence from 2009 to 2010, and co-chaired the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property, which published a series of recommendations in 2013. He also published a book titled Military Engagement, Influencing Armed Forces Worldwide to Support Democratic Transition in 2013. And today, Admiral Blair will talk about rare metals in defense and national security. So please welcome Admiral Blair.
So thanks, Takeo. Like most of you, I find there are just too many interesting subjects in the world to really retire. You have to keep working on big, important issues, of which this is really one. So when I accepted the assignment of giving a keynote address, I had some real misgivings, but there was a very persuasive person who was making the assignment to me, and I finally gave in to myself and decided I should talk about this. My misgivings were not difficult to understand. When my last chemistry course, the periodic table was much smaller than it is today. I missed a few discoveries in the last 40 years, and like most of us, not being versed in the area for a long time makes you a bit hesitant. But if there's one thing I've learned, and I was talking with John Thompson earlier here, in this area, anyone who thinks he knows what's going on just doesn't know the subject well enough. So I'm somewhat reassured in offering some perspectives from my point of view, having been involved in mostly government and defense policy over the years, as to some of the characteristics of this area, and a few suggestions on particularly international cooperation with United States-Japan cooperation at its core to deal with some of these issues that we've uncovered already in our first couple of sessions. The time has gone quickly, and it's really been only a little over 6 years since September 21st, 2010, when China cut off the exports of rare metals to Japan in the midst of a dispute over the Japanese arrest of a drunken Chinese fishing captain who had repeatedly rammed a Japanese Coast Guard ship, an issue which to me as a mariner seemed pretty simple, but turned out not to be so simple in international politics. But this intrusion of a political rivalry into business relationships, economic relationships, was a shockwave. Although many of you in this room had understood many of these issues for years, this Chinese action brought two uncomfortable truths to the attention of national leaders in Japan and the United States, and also to the wider interested public. I'd say the first uncomfortable truth was that a number of metals that were difficult to pronounce, were mined and processed in relatively small quantities, were absolutely crucial to not only the consumer products of our lives, but also to a lot of military and national defense equipment. And second, that China, as both a consumer and a producer of these rare metals, played an extremely important, if not dominant role in many of them. And since that rare earth shock 6 years ago, both Japan and the United States have taken steps to protect themselves from similar events happening again, and we've discussed some of those this morning. We've also discussed that incident itself this morning. Now, Japan, for its part, led by METI, and we're so fortunate to have an actual participant in the events of that time with us, but it has actively sought overseas sources for rare metals outside of China. It's invested in research and development, both to reduce the amount of rare metals that are used in manufacturing and to substitute rare metals that are more that are more widely available for those sourced mostly from China. In addition, it has undertaken, as we learned, a certain amount of stockpiling of standby supplies of metals in case of supply interruptions. Here in the United States, manufacturing companies have studied their supply chains. They probably just started this after 2010, but they're now doing it now. They've taken actions to mitigate potential shortages. And the primary government response has been taken by the Department of Defense, specifically the Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA. DLA is the steward of the National Defense Stockpile, or NDS. Every 2 years, it issues a report called the Strategic and Critical Materials Report on stockpile requirements. The latest was January of 2015. Another version is due in the next few months. And this report provides the results of a comprehensive analysis of the requirements for rare metals, other materials critical to military equipment and to the national economy. And from this analysis come recommendations to monitor some materials, to purchase others. And Congress has actually provided money over the last several years for stockpile purchases. And there have also been some stockpile sales as materials have determined to be no longer critical or no longer required in those quantities. So there have been serious actions by both the United States and by Japan. Meanwhile, China itself has taken actions, and it's not the same China we're dealing with in 2016 that it was in 2010 when these events occurred. As we heard, as part of its overall policy of indigenous innovation, China has kept domestic rare metal prices low, incentivizing international companies to locate their factories that build products with significant rare metal content into China. Now, I think we heard that in 2010, China was using a combination of 19th century economic materials nationalism and 21st century materials nationalism. It was trying to do both of them at the same time, and couldn't quite figure out if it wanted to antagonize Japan or charm Japan, and probably did some of both. And so since that time, it appears that China has been more into 21st century metal nationalism. However, the specter, the shadow of 19th century nationalism still remains, especially powerful in the minds of policymakers. And as with other industries, if a foreign company comes to operate in China, China requires that it be majority owned by a Chinese firm, and that pretty strict technology transfer requirements be levied on the company coming into China. And the Chinese make no bones about it. Their idea is to learn from foreign companies, displace them within the Chinese market, and eventually beat them overseas. They're not very subtle about this. So, in addition to this sort of 21st century nationalism, indigenous innovation, China has also attempted to consolidate, as we heard, its rare metal mining and processing companies into larger state-owned enterprises, giving Beijing greater central control over their operations, reducing the illegal mining, the illegal smuggling of some of these materials that have been spirited out of the country. And we saw some figures on the extent of this, which is not in single digits, very, very significant. So everything has moved since 2010. Actions in the United States, actions in Japan, actions in China, and we heard from Reinhold some actions also in the European Union. So what's been the result of all of these policy changes 6 years on? Well, most important, as far as we can tell, there has been no repeat instance of manipulation of rare metal exports for political purposes. Now, it's impossible to say whether this is the result of timely action by the United States, Japan, the European Union, changes in the market, technological changes, or Chinese calculations about what works and what doesn't. But the good news is that in the last 6 years, we have not seen a repetition of 2010. I'm sure many of you experts know there have been probably smaller instances of this done at the tactical level, but there has not been anything on that major national scale. But few knowledgeable observers believe that the United States, Japan have really achieved true rare metals security. Overall, in recent years, the demand for rare metals has been dampened, along with prices. Most experts believe that the reduced demand has been primarily due to manufacturing companies' invention of ways to reduce the use of rare metals within individual products, along with relatively slow overall growth of the world economy, the same slow growth that's affecting the demand for a host of other commodities, iron, copper, oil, steel. But at the same time, these price drops have undercut the very attempts to develop supply chains, mining, manufacturing, processing outside of China, and most notably, and we've referred to it already, Molycorp's Mountain Pass rare earths mine in California, after a brief life, was shut down a little over a year ago in August of last year. And the company's press release on the closure cited the low prices of the past 4 years as the defining factor in that decision, although, as we've heard from some participants, there were a number of factors, as there usually are. So the really important question, I think, for this conference is whether the United States and Japan are still vulnerable to interruption or manipulation of rare earth metal supplies. Could the events of 2010 happen again, or something worse? Are there other dangers in this unique and opaque and difficult to understand market? And if so, what can be done about them? Are these programs which both countries and the companies in those countries initiated 6 years ago adequate, or do we need more? So like many of the non-experts who are attending this conference who are not in the business, I owe a great debt to David Abraham. It was his book which brought these issues to my attention originally. It's a serious scholarly investigation of the subject. It provides solid recommendations for the action, and David also brings that world to life with his stories of the people who actually operate the system. And David, thank you very much for helping us organize this this conference, which hopefully will take us a step forward. But David Abraham concludes that more action is needed, both in Japan and the United States. It's needed by both governments and by the private sector for our two countries to achieve true metals security. And I very much agree with him. And so let me sketch out several possible actions that we could take. And I'd be interested in comments. We'll probably have some time left now, or we can certainly come back to them during the course of the conference. And I'm going to use rare earths as my primary example for some of these measures, but the same measures are needed for many of the other rare metals among the 40 to 45 that fall in that category. Now, the first requirement that has been referred to several times, which you absolutely need to make sound decisions in both Japan and the United States and in the public and private sectors, is better data, better estimates. The Industrial Mineral Company of Australia states succinctly in one of its recent reports, and I quote, "The rare earth industry suffers from a lack of basic transparency, requiring a great deal of intuition and deduction." And several of our comments this morning, some of you experts echoed that. Now, there are many factors for this transparency. The one elephant in the room, of course, is the lack of transparency by China itself, which regards publication of data in this area as a state secret, to be protected, not to be shared. This 2015 report by the Defense Logistics Agency, in a surprising burst of ungrammatical humor that you don't usually find in turgid government reports, had the following to say: The number of analysts attempting to estimate and forecast rare earth demand are too numerous to count. What is clear, however, is that no two analysts' figures ever agree. This unfortunate reality is a result of different estimation techniques, survey methods, and basic definitions of end-use sectors, categories, and data classification. And this is from the people who are trying to write official government reports. The level of their frustration really bubbles through, and as I say, in a way that you don't really usually get in official documents. It's wonderful, wonderful reading. But if you look closely, you've got to believe that the United States and Japan can do better than intuition and deduction. The governments of the two countries should establish, I believe, a binational agency to establish knowable data on the rare metals market and to isolate and bound the areas of unknowable but still important information. The United States has a rare metals center of excellence in Ames, Iowa. There have been a series of useful government-to-government meetings, including not only Japan, but also the European Union, Canada, and Australia. But it seems that rather than these periodic meetings of experts, a standing organization of people who are working on these data and analysis problems is needed, and both countries and private sectors have lots to contribute. Now, such a binational agency would take into account the somewhat different priorities of the two countries as it determines its data gathering and its research agenda. For Japan, as we heard, rare metal security is primarily a matter of assured supplies for manufacturers of products used by consumers and other businesses. Japan uses half again the quantity of rare metals than does the United States. China, by way of contrast, uses over 3 times as much as Japan and the United States combined. And the United States is a complicated relationship because the United States imports many components that are big users of rare metals from Japan. Batteries, catalysts, magnets are the big ones, and a host of more specialized components and subcomponents. And the United States, for its part, is somewhat more concerned with having adequate supplies of rare metals for the manufacture of military items, from night vision devices to lasers to heads-up displays in aircraft cockpits. Demand for rare metals, for example, in pieces of equipment like laser rangefinders and night vision devices shot up sharply in the Mideast wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan. The F-35, which will provide the backbone of both the U.S. Air Force and the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, is, to quote a recent article on the subject, a flying periodic table. In addition, a binational agency to provide authoritative data on rare metals has to have full cooperation from the private sector in both Japan and the United States. Now, this 2015 strategic report goes into detail on how it comes to its conclusions, and it's clear that there are many American companies that cooperate with the Defense Logistics Agency in providing data. And the DLA analysts, in turn, promise to protect proprietary information, and if you read the report, it's blanked out in parts that would give away information that the companies consider important. Japan does not publish, to my knowledge, a detailed government report like this, but METI has traditionally been able to work with Japanese private companies on a basis of trust. So there are ways for an agency like this to handle proprietary information from cooperating companies without threatening their profits and market share if it's done carefully. And to sustain cooperation and support, the products of the U.S.-Japan Rare Metals Information Agency, which is what I would call it, need to be useful both to governments and to the companies that contribute data to them. There's nothing more frustrating for a company than the great vacuum cleaner of government data requirements. They get nothing for it in return. They do the best they can for a while, but it sort of tapers off after a year. If you are going to have a vibrant agency that really serves as a bridge between government and private sectors, you have to have something in it for the companies in return for the data that they give. I would cite as a good model the U.S. Energy Information Agency. Its reports are written with a private sector requirements very much in mind, and I find that they're widely used by companies as well as by the governments. And I would think that a Rare Metals Information Agency could accomplish that same feat and keep support from the companies that deal with it. And finally, this agency, I'd say, would have responsibility for some of the things that Senator Murkowski talked about. The criticality index, the resource assessments that are mandated in her bill could very well be done and knowledgeably done by this organization, which could assume a sort of a central data and assessment role. Now, a second area in which the United States and Japan need to cooperate, and it's been already mentioned in our discussion so far, is this area of research and development. The investment needs to be both in human capital and in technological development. David Abraham's book and several of our speakers and Senator Murkowski's bill have all mentioned this reduced number of metallurgical scientists, engineers in both Japan and the United States. In the past, both countries have made specific government investments in human capital in areas that they consider to be important to their economic, their defense futures, and the results have been positive. We know how to do this. 2 weeks ago, I was up, for example, in Carnegie Mellon University talking about cybersecurity and met some of the cyber scholars, which are now funded by the US government. 4 years at a top American university in return for 3 years of service in a government agency after they graduate. These kids were wonderful. The ones that I met with had just won the cybersecurity NCAA Division I challenge, and they were looking forward to working in the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Agency, and then they were going to go out and make $1 gazillion after they finished that. We know how to do this in both Japan and the United States, and it should be a high priority. Private companies in both Japan and the United States, as we've heard, are already funding research on the reduction of the use of rare metals in existing production processes. They're working on substitutions, changing their supply chains to bring them outside of China. But these are relatively short-term investments that require a quick payback, and we all know that that's how companies generally prioritize their own internal R&D. They do not feel a responsibility to invest in the more basic R&D that will lead to breakthroughs, true breakthroughs in the use of rare metals. And David Abraham in his book tells the story of Masato Sagawa, who worked for many years to invent the neodymium iron boron magnet. There are a few companies today that would sponsor that level of sustained research for that long, with so many of the experts saying it can never be made to happen. It just won't work. And so this is the role, I think this is the role for government-funded research in both Japan and the United States. And we need it in order for our countries to stay on the cutting edge of developments in this area, to develop the next set of improved or totally new civilian products and military equipment that are dependent on rare metals. Now, the third area in which I believe the United States and Japan can take cooperative or at least concerted action is in this stockpiling and other mitigation measures for supplies. And again, we've discussed this area somewhat already. The U.S. stockpile is based on the Cold War model. Analyze the consumption of an American war economy over an extended period, make assumptions about sources of supply and security of those sources, and then stockpile the difference. It's not clear that this approach, however straightforward and sensible it seems to be as it is appropriate for the world of rare metal products in the 21st century. And it's not that the work of the DLA team is not exhaustive, not sophisticated. It monitors over 160 minerals. It has developed a detailed model called the, here's a mouthful, Risk Assessment and Mitigation Framework for Strategic Materials, known as the RAMP-SUM. It consults widely with industry analysts, manufacturing companies themselves. Maybe some of you all in the room work with DLA on these estimates. They spend almost $1 million in consulting fees every year when they compile it. So, check their RFPs. But in its latest report, this 2015 report, the DLA team itself wonders, and again, this is what's so wonderful about this report. It says, it is also possible that additional research will demonstrate that stockpiling is suboptimal and that other governmental authorities such as Defense Priorities and Allocation System, DPAS, Title III, or MANTEC would be more effective. Can you imagine any non-government report saying, it's possible that our company is suboptimal, but we need some more research on it. So even the people who are closely involved with this process think that there may be something better. Now, the National Defense Stockpile does not have a glorious history, even when it was dealing with the slow-moving technologies of copper, steel, titanium. One of our speakers earlier talked about the National Academy of Sciences critique of the stockpile program, how it has a hard time determining which materials are essential and how much of them to stockpile. These are biannual reports. The funding is doled out annually by a Congress that has many other distractions. And with the rapid march of technology, it's very hard to maintain the flexible, forward-looking, responsive operation that it needs. And this is in no way to denigrate the smart and dedicated people who do the work on this. It's just the reality of government operations in a fast-moving and dynamic market. And certainly the defense priorities and allocation system is an alternative. The manufacture of military equipment consumes single-digit percentages of the rare metals used in the American economy. Under the DPAS system, defense uses of rare metals become prioritized over civilian uses when there's a shortage. Material is diverted from civilian to military items. Now, civilian manufacturers need to be included in the planning process. They need to be warned that some of their material may be taken away from them under certain circumstances, but this is an alternative which needs to be explored. David Abraham and others have suggested the alternative of placing the mitigation responsibility completely on the private sector. We heard from Reinhold the very sophisticated process that Siemens goes through in order to determine what's vital, what's not, how you mitigate it, what you have to hold within your company. The American General Accountability Office talked to several companies and came up with a similar description for processes followed by the private company. They say, an official of the company stated that it regularly collects data from manufacturing divisions across the company, differentiates critical materials by their ability to produce an assembly line stoppage, a production line stoppage. For potential material shortages that can stop production, for example, company officials may have regular meetings with the suppliers, forecast supplies 6 months into the future, adjust contracting arrangements, and have mitigation actions in place. So I think most of this is since 2010, but private companies have figured out ways to mitigate risk of production stoppages in the equipment that they are producing. This does not safeguard them against, as we discussed earlier, new technologies that are invented that use metals that were not considered to be that essential or well used before the product was invented, but it's some sort of disruption that you can, some sort of assurance that at least you can have the gear that you're using right now, night vision goggles, heads-up displays, laser rangefinders, and F-35s, and so on. So perhaps instead of the Department of Defense doing the stockpiling, it could include a contract provision in the companies that supply defense equipment requiring the analysis, the development of the capacity for mitigation during a prolonged period of supply interruptions. And this standby capacity could be funded as a feature of the original weapons contracts themselves. As for mitigation measures affecting the private sector, it just seems that there's more work to be done on a cross-industry and industry-wide basis. It's all very well for one company to safeguard its own supply lines, its own production facilities that are happening right now, but the sum of this does not necessarily protect an overall national economy, whether of Japan or the United States. Is it adequate for them to take mitigation measures of their own, or is there some wider government view? We heard a little bit of Japan's view, the philosophy that only if the markets fail does the government step in, but I think we all think that's a little bit late, that a little bit of preventing the markets from failing or helping the markets not to fail might be superior, but we haven't really worked out exactly how is that to be done. We've seen various techniques tried of subsidizing sources of rare metals outside of China, whether by Japan or the United States, other secure locations, Australia, Malaysia turned out to be not so secure, as we were reminded. But rare metals are so crucial to both the economic and the military security of both Japan and the United States that serious public-private work is needed to achieve it. And I think most of us feel that we can do more on an economy-wide basis than we do, and it's really the job of the government to initiate this with cooperation from the companies and the company associations, but not them taking the lead. That would be unnatural behavior. Let me finish up with a radical suggestion that goes beyond the United States and Japan and does include China. Hold a Snickers, please. There are, in fact, some areas of international commerce that, without real formal negotiations going on between governments, are in the process of becoming neutral zones or safe zones in the geopolitical and security rivalry and competition among these three countries, which is the dominant factor of their relationships. I would argue, for example, that energy is in that category. Traded on an international market, complicated supply and demand relationships, but energy is becoming an area in which I sense a tacit agreement emerging that, short of a general protracted war among the three countries, none of them sees it in its advantage to interdict the supplies of the other or to try to manipulate energy supplies for gain. You try to do it, the blowback, the snapback provisions are just too big and unpredictable. And I have a lot of meetings with Japanese and Chinese leaders, and you can just see the serious, mature leaders sort of recoiling from clever ideas to be able to use energy to, you name it, hurt China during a Taiwan scenario, hurt Japan during another scenario. Another area in which consensus is growing is that high-level cyber warfare may be another neutral zone. It may be another safe area. Japan and the United States and China are all so vulnerable to serious cyber attacks on their critical infrastructure systems that I get the sense from leaders that it is highly unlikely that any of them would unleash attacks against the other for fear of equally devastating retaliation. It seems to be becoming a keep-out zone. Is it possible that we could include rare metals in this category? If that's true, then it opens the way for a transparent, regulated rare metal exchange, which we've heard several references to the absence of right now. Prices could be set, positions could be hedged, technological developments could be anticipated and accommodated, smuggling could be discouraged, transparency could exist. Now, establishing a rare metals exchange would require certainly a change of the current philosophy of the Chinese government, currently wedded to secrecy, attracted by the mercantilist possibilities of their position as a major producer. It would also put out of business some of the buccaneers of the currency of the rare metals business, some of whom are in this room, who can deliver the relatively small supplies needed by many companies with few questions asked about provenance and a pretty strong hand on determining price. However, we really don't know the lessons that China has drawn from this 2010 incident. Do they think on balance it was a good thing? Or do they think on balance it turned out, play out not so well, not worth trying again? There certainly are manufacturing companies in China, which after all is the world's largest consumer of rare metals, who want to go international, want to measure up to the big international companies of the world, Japanese, American, European, and they would see great advantages in a transparent international commodity market for their efficient operations. And those of you who have remunerative jobs in this rare metals market, I'm sure would find new jobs in a more regulated market as well, and you'd be very successful. Now, I propose, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of these ideas with the complete confidence of a person who could not distinguish between europium, scandium, and yttrium if you place samples right here in front of me. However, it does seem to me common sense that the United States and Japan should take at least these 4 steps to improve their rare metal security. First, improve the quality of data available to both government officials and to business executives. Second, invest in more metallurgical scientists, engineers, and in the basic research and development of rare metal applications. Third, take a hard look at current mitigation measures against supply interruptions, come up with an improved system involving both its private sector and the government, an improvement over this current stockpiling system with its semi-secrecy, its conflict of government and private roles. And finally, push this idea that rare metals can become perhaps an international economic safe zone so that there can be a high-quality rare metals exchange established in order to bring normal business processes to the trade in these metals. And such a market would have to include China as both a producer and a consumer, but it would also benefit China both as a producer and as a consumer. So again, I look forward to hearing your comments about these ideas during the course of the afternoon. I managed to have used up all my time, so I can avoid questions right now. But our objective, I think, is to improve, our common objectives, improve the rare metal security of the United States, Japan, our partners, and in fact, all the citizens of the world. We all think, I believe, that better security of rare metals is one of the keys to the future economic health and progress of all of our citizens. Thank you very much.